Now I want to talk really briefly about law. Now, a lot of people have misconceptions about law, where it comes from, and how it should be organized. People have this view that law comes from the state, that the state invented law, that a state is required for law, and that law is basically like an encyclopedia of things written down that we all have to obey. If you think about it, law is something that arises only when and because we have disputes. So hypothetically, if we lived in a, I don't know, a Garden of Eden situation where there was no dispute, where nobody ever had any um, qualms or problems with other people. There's nobody ever said, uh, said, hey, you and I have a disagreement. Then there would be no law. There would be no need for law. The need only arises when two parties disagree about something and disagree in a way that can't be resolved. So it would be one thing if I say my favorite color is blue and you say your favorite color is red, and we just shrug our shoulders and be like, well, what doesn't matter? It's another thing is if I say that's my house and you say no, that's your house, uh, and we both want exclusive use of it. And so when that happens, we have basically two choices. We can either escalate to violence, which does happen and can happen, but that has certain problems. A, that's very risky. Uh, One of us may die, both of us may die, we both may become injured. And although in certain circumstances that's acceptable, so for instance, if you say you're going to kill me, uh, it's not unreasonable for me to escalate to the point where I might kill you, because uh, the worst that could happen is that I could risk my own death. And since you're already advocating that, nothing much has changed. But if we're having a dispute where uh, we don't value the disputed item as much as the possibility of dying, uh, then it makes sense to look for a third alternative, and that would be uh, to resolve the dispute uh, through some manner of discussion. Now we can either do that directly with each other and sit down and say, okay, we have a dispute, let's work this out. And actually that works most of the time. But when it doesn't work, and you still don't want to escalate into violence and all the risks that that entails, you can basically go to a third party. And of course, the third party doesn't necessarily have to be a third person. It could be an institution or a third person or a group, and say we have a dispute that we cannot resolve between ourselves. Uh, Please resolve it for us. And this is where arbitration comes from. And there's actually um, evidence that this has been going on for a long time, and that among the various theories about where governments even come from, this is one of them, and that uh, people who were good at resolving disputes, who were good judges, as we would probably call them today, although I think it would be better to say that they're arbitrators, uh, over time may have developed into the leaders of communities, and perhaps proto kings or actual kings. That's empirically neither here nor there. We don't really know if that's the case or not. But what it is important, though, is that it is through these arbitrations that a body of law is developed. So it only develops where disputes arise. If nobody ever fights about uh, what their favorite color is, then there's never going to be a law about what the best color is. However, when people have disputes on property, who owns what, then there is going to be many arguments and many cases brought before arbiters, and there will be a body of law that will develop. And if we look, I don't know about the rest of the world, but many codes of law developed in this way. Very basically, none were simply created by fiat, by a ruler. Um, there have been a number of famous cases of rulers who have codified laws. So, like Hammurabi is usually listed way up there as the lawgiver, one of the first. But it's very clear that Hammurabi did not invent law out of nothing. It's very clear that uh, Babylon was without law, and people never resolved disputes, and then Hammurabi came and invented law. It's pretty clear that a common law had already developed, and he merely codified it. And indeed, that's the trend you typically see with states. Um, the Anglo-Saxon law, common in the United States, which I happen to think is not a totally bad set of laws, were developed by the Anglo-Saxons in the absence uh, of a state. And actually, for a very long time in England, the state did not actually take an active role in the provision of law. So you had kings of England, and they weren't really passing legislation at all. Crimes were, well, disputes between people were being dealt with arbiters based on the common law, which was not something that was just created by fiat. So the thing with common law is that it's not immutable. It is changeable as circumstances change. So it is conceivable, for instance, that property laws can change over time with situations. So, for instance, it is at least possible. We might argue how likely, but it's possible that things like intellectual property laws pertaining to information and electronics would develop when there became a need, where they wouldn't have been a need prior to those capacities existing. So there's this tendency for people to want to say, well, there should just be a law, that cuts across, that applies, to everybody the same way. And this is kind of arbitrary. You can't just say that everything be judged by some objective standard. There is no objective standard. You have to take it all by a case-by-case basis, and the way we conceive law should be that it arises spontaneously and that it's not a top-down thing. Because the other problem with a top-down situation is that it's ripe for abuse. In fact, pretty much always when that happens, the person or group that is creating the laws makes a point to give themselves special privileges that they then use to exploit everybody else. I mean, I think that happens every single time. I don't know that there are any examples where this is not the case, and often it's the case is so bad that it actually can destroy society. So the legal privileges awarded to the law monopoly, which is often the state, could be the king or the pharaoh or the parliament, are often so horrible that they can actually kill a society. Which is hard to do. I mean, usually even volcanoes and droughts and the like, you can't do that, and yet a monopoly on law actually can. So that's just something to bear in mind.